This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate to have a distinguished guest, and his name is Dr. Ali Khan. He's an assistant professor of history and political science at Ashoka University in India. He received his degree from University of Cambridge. He's also a writer and columnist. His research includes Islam and Muslims in South Asia. Welcome to our show. Thank you for coming, Dr. Khan.
Thank you very much for having me, Mr. Islam, and it's a great honor to be on your show. And greetings to you in America from here in Lucknow, in India.
Lucknow, wonderful. What a city of Nawab.
Well, it was at one point.
Well, but it still is the kernel of civilization, Nawab Awadh. I'll talk to you a little bit about. Ali, your story and journey is a remarkable success and fascinating. Please tell us your life story and your interest in South Asian Muslims. I'm curious about Mahmudabad state and what is your relationship with the state and what is this located?
Well, I'm from a town called Mahmudabad, which is not very far from Lucknow. This is the town that my ancestors were from, and they originally came to India at the beginning of the 13th century. So a very, very long time ago. And they came to India as qazis, as qaziul khuzat. They stayed in India as religious judges, for those of you who don't know the word qazi. They came during Shahabuddin Ghori's time, then they stayed through the time of Muhammad Tughlaq. They entered military service during the time of the Mughals. Mahmudabad itself, we used to live in another town called Bilehra, which was close by. And Mahmudabad was founded in the 16th century during Akbar's time by Nawab Mahmud Khan. And then gradually, as the generations went on, there was the rise of the kingdom of Awadh in the 18th century. Relations developed with the Nawabs of Awadh, who were Nawab Wazirs to the Mughal Empire. So there were governors who, seeing a political opportunity, declared their independence and allied with the British. And then in the 19th century, one of my ancestors, Muqimud-Dawla, Nawab Ali Khan, he died fighting the British in the uprising. Him and a number of the rulers, Hindu rulers. In fact, my family had a pact, a blood brother pact with the Hindu Rajas of Ramnagar Dhameri, which is in Barabanki district, not far from us. And then, of course, the British established themselves. My ancestors entered politics. My great-grandfather was the founding vice-chancellor of Aligarh, which, of course, you attended.
What's the name of your great-grandfather?
So he was the Maharaja of Mahmudabad, Muhammad Ali Muhammad Khan, and there's the Mahmudabad hostel still there and many other things.
That is correct. Yeah, I do not remember that, but I heard. And what a fascinating story do you have? I want to kind of concentrate a little bit about South Asian Muslims and Middle Eastern Muslims. Do you think there are some unique distinctions between these two? If so, what are those differences? And do you think a democratic Islam is emerging, and it is not in the Arabs' heartland, but it is in Muslim South Asia? So tell us a little bit about. I know there's a difference between the culture, the language, and the democracy. So tell us what's the difference it is, and is it very similar to the differences between Indian Christians and the European Christians?
Well, look, this is a very important question, and I've had the good fortune of living and studying in Syria. I specialized in my undergraduate degree in the Middle East and Iran and Syria. I speak Persian, I speak Farsi and Arabic. Of course, I speak Urdu. And, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that, of course, in the last 70, 80 odd years, the world is fundamentally transformed in a number of ways. And globalization, ease of travel, ease of communication, and most recently, social media and so on. These have fundamentally affected the manner in which Muslims perceive of themselves. And of course, one of the things that they're concerned with is the search for authenticity. Right? What is true Islam? And this is the question essentially that that troubles a lot of people, that a lot of people spend a lot of time discussing, and so on and so forth. As far as the comparison between the Middle East is concerned and South Asia is concerned, compared to Europe, let's say, one of the things that we're seeing across the world is the rise of populist governments, right? In a sense, we're seeing the unraveling of what Francis Fukuyama called the end of history. So emphatically, he was so proud of the fact that, you know, liberalism represented the end of history. But the fact is that the values that you talk about, democratic values, secularism, freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of thought, freedom of assembly, you know, many of the things that, for example, I admire America deeply about, even though perhaps in America they're diminished at this time. These took 300 years. These took 300 years in Europe to develop. In the public sphere, you know, there's this scholar, German scholar called Jürgen Habermas. He talks about the public sphere, you know, the print, music, the town square, cafes, opera, you know, all of these things that spread ideas within society. Now, whether it's the Middle East or whether it's us in South Asia or indeed Africa, the values that became touted as universal values, political values, did not have an organic presence in our societies. In other words, our societies did not go through the social revolution that Europe went through. So, you know, we were colonized, we had nationalist movements, often there were elites who created very, very, for example, in the case of India, a wonderful constitution, an inclusive constitution. But the problem was that that project, the dream that the Constitution of India holds up for all Indians, was not mirrored by the fact that of the realities on the ground. And so, you know,
I want to change the subject and talk about the difference between the North Indian Muslims and the Muslim from rest of the South Asia. And also talk about this sect of Islam, which is the Sunni, Shia, Ismailis, and Baharas. And why they have a shared heritage, but this language and cultures are totally different and uniquely different between the two. So just take a few minutes and explain to us what those are. And then I want to go to the next topic.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, in India, there are as many sects as, you know, there's a famous hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who said that my community will divide into 72 sects. So you find many of them in India. And of course, you know, this is the beauty of Islam also, because if you imagine Islam as representing a core of a certain set of principles, the way in which they manifest themselves across the world is different. So you have the Barelvis, the Deobandis, the Ahl Hadith, the Salafis, the Shia, the Bohra, the Dawoodi Bohra, the Sulaimani Bohra, the Zaydis. We don't have them in India, but they're in Yemen. The Sufis, the various kind of Sufis. So, you know, it's a tremendously diverse country in terms of school of thought. Then, of course, every language, every region has its own language, has its own ethnic character. For example, Bohra, as you mentioned, they tend to mostly be from Gujarat, mostly trading communities. So this is the result of a very long history of the slow spread of ideas and the manner in which Islam has rooted itself in the cultural matrix of wherever it has traveled to. And if I just say the last thing on this question, so one of the most beautiful things, if you see, is which tells us about the plurality of Islamic civilization. You look at the mosque architecture in Kashgar, in Xinjiang, in southwest China. You come to South Asia, you go to Central Asia, you go to Iran, then you come to the Arab countries, you go to North Africa. Everywhere, the mosque it represents the core symbols. Often there's some kind of dome or in some shape and a minaret, but it echoes the local culture, the local civilization. And this is the beauty in a sense. And I think, in my opinion, India really represents this, the plurality and the diversity which unfortunately are now suffering because of globalization.
And
Everyone is trying to chase a standard model.
I want to talk about it. As you probably know, the idea of the dome in the mosque came from Central Asia during the 7th century. The mausoleum that was built by the Seljuk, who were a Turkish descent, but they were slaves. So, and that's where the idea came from. And that idea went to Russia, and from Russia, the United States copied what we have in the U.S. Capitol Hill, the dome.
Well, I mean, also actually, the Italians were deeply influenced.
Italians did the same thing.
Florence, the great cathedral in Florence, the dome.
Exactly. You said it very well. Yeah. So what I want to talk about is the Babri Masjid. How did the Babri Masjid become a Ram temple? Why this conversion is important to Indian Hindus? This kind of act do not bring the people together. It tears apart the harmonious fabric of India. Do you think this is the birth of India that is against the founding principles of India? India always stood as a global beacon of hope for democracy and secularism. Hindu and Muslim live together. They cherish their children's future. Their bonds are stronger than the differences that too often drive them apart. Can they find a common ground to work together because they all have a shared goals and shared responsibility and shared sacrifices? And also the fact is, we should be united together to build a country which is stronger and better and fight against the poverty, hunger, disease. So shed you some light on this.
So, I mean, there's no point in going into the historical detail of the Babri Masjid, but you know what it represents. And really the Babri Masjid is symbolic of the resurgence of ethnic nationalism. And this is happening across the world, right? You had a similar kind of debate in Turkey recently with the Hagia Sophia, with the Hagia Sophia mosque. And, you know, I wrote an article, for instance, in which I argued that it would have been a beautiful gesture and a sign of being on the moral high ground if one part of Hagia Sophia was given to the community to whom the original cathedral belonged, which are the Eastern Orthodox Christians. So, you know, the fact is, across the world, we see this rise of ethnic religious nationalism. In India, it goes back to my earlier point, right? Our societies did not go through the revolutionary churn that Europe went through during the Enlightenment and before that and after that. And even in Europe, that social contract is coming apart. You know, you see the rise of the far right in Germany, in England, in France, in Hungary, in Austria, in Italy. The Babri Masjid, you know, I often read this couplet in Urdu. It says, Masjid jo tooti, kaun si ye jaye gham hai sheikh, kuch qasre dil nahi jo banaya na jayega. You know, this, why are you crying over this mosque, O sheikh? Sheikh being a religious figure, Muslim religion. For it is not like the palace of the heart that once it is broken, it can never be repaired. But the fact is that actually this whole process is about the heart, because the trust that a citizen has in their government is about constitution, about law and order. And the Babri Masjid was demolished illegally. And the people who demolished it weren't brought to account. Today, we have a Supreme Court judgment. They have said that the Ram Mandir should be built there. And I suppose most people are not going to dispute that. And they want this chapter to finish. The big question, I suppose, that faces us today, as you said in your remarks, is the Babri Masjid the end of a chapter and possibly we put the ghosts of the past to rest? Or is this the beginning of a new chapter in which ethnic supremacy, a sort of nationalism is given front and center? We've already seen it happen in the last few years with the CAA protest, with the Triple Talaq law, with the UAPA anti-terrorism law, with what happened in Kashmir, Article 370. So, you know, I wrote this article recently where I said the Muslims are moving from marginalization to exclusion in India. And it is more important than ever before for people to make Muslims, and for the state to make Muslims feel like they have a stake in the country. Because as soon as any community, any society feels like they don't have a stake in their country, they don't have a stake in their society, unfortunately, then, you know, a conflict can begin that can turn very ugly. You know, we
Very
saw
well
a
said.
glimpse of that with what happened with George Floyd in America. You know,
Right.
ultimately, it is about representation. It is about feeling that you are included in the political process.
Very well
And
said.
unfortunately, so far, the BJP has not given indications of the fact that it actually seriously wants to engage with and include Muslims as free citizens of India. And the last thing I'll say on this, Mr. Islam, I'm sure you're familiar with American history more than I am. But I teach in a university here, and one of the things that I love to give my students is the Federalist Papers. Now, the Federalist Papers, if you read them carefully, people like Alexander Hamilton were writing, and there's this wonderful quote. I won't repeat the entirety of it, but basically it says that people should be most wary of those in whom they place the most amount of trust. In other words, the government. And across the world, we are seeing politicians who refuse to be questioned. Whereas, of course, it is, this is the fundamental right and the fundamental cornerstone of democracy is the ability of citizens to be able to question their government, which is why, in Hollywood films and so on, often you say when people swear and take the oath of joining military service or oath of office, they say from all enemies, domestic or foreign. Because the idea is that the government can also cease to stop representing the interests of the people. And I think we're seeing that in your country and here.
Well, but we are taking these steps, as you
yes,
know,
of course.
Joe Biden just announced
yes.
a biracial woman, bringing the diversity to the forefront of America. And as you know, the Muslim population in India is close to about 20%, which is the second largest Muslim population in the world. In this country, the black population is a very small, that's a 9% electoral vote. But the diversity brings us together, and diversity makes us stronger. We should be able to use the skills and abilities of anyone, regardless of their caste, creed, religion, race, background, and belief. So
I completely agree. Yes.
I would like you to tell me tell us the situation of the Muslims under this government as they face discrimination, hostility, and prejudice. They share a city, but not a community. They share a common dwelling, but not in a common effort. Do you look forward to an India that provides equal opportunity and inclusive economic mobility to all, regardless of caste and creed? Attack on one faith is attack on all faith. When we attack each other, we are tearing apart the fabric of India. The bond that binds the Hindus and Muslims together are very strong because they have been doing this thing for many, many centuries. We must find a common ground to work together. So tell us a little bit about that. How do we seek a common ground to work together?
Well, you see, I think as you know better than I do, and again, these are ideas that are well known across the world. If you have social instability, then there is no way you can have economic stability or economic growth.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that regardless of whichever economic system you believe in, whether you believe in a welfare state, whether you believe in a capitalist free market economy, none of these function if the fundamental building block of a democracy, which is a harmonious society, does not exist. As I said, there's a big think tank here in India called the Observer Research Foundation, and I wrote a paper for them. And as I said earlier in this discussion, my paper is called From Marginalization to Exclusion, Manufacturing Conflict. Over the last few years, I don't think anyone will dispute the fact that Muslims have gradually been moved away from being on the peripheries to now being completely excluded. In a sense, if you want to understand what's happening, the BJP has picked up the center of Indian politics and pushed it so much to the right that every other group nearly in Indian politics has adjusted, right? the BJP doesn't give tickets in elections for Muslims to fight on. So there's no way that through a BJP government there can be Muslim representations. The few people who do exist in the central government, or for example in the state legislature here in UP, are nominated. So they are Muslims who are essentially token Muslims. On a social level, you know, I had a friend of mine was here the other day. He's involved in the entertainment industry and lives in Bombay. He was telling me how difficult it is for Muslims to find housing, even for very well-known Muslims, let alone for people who are poorer. For poor Muslims, they are already facing local stigma, social exclusion. You know, in UP, for instance, in 2017, slaughterhouses and abattoirs were cut. And this not only affected Muslims, but it also affected the other very marginalized community in India, which is Dalits. So, for example, when the meat business was affected and shut down, that affected the leather industry. And in the leather industry, not only are Muslims involved, but Dalits involved. So the solution to all this is to realize that every society and every community's interests are interlinked with other communities' interests. If you target one community, it is going to have knock-on effects on other communities.
Very well said.
And the politics of hate and the politics of division will ultimately serve short-term political goals, but in the long term, you're only going to create a more destabilized country, which is not going to grow, which is not going to be able to provide health, education, infrastructure to its citizens.
Very well said. Do you believe that it is important for India to succeed? If India has to succeed, they have to bring the Muslim together, and their success, Muslim success, is India's success and our success. And do you think that Muslims need to have a unity over division and hope over fear? And what needs to be done to build an inclusive and stronger and tolerant India?
So I think I have 2 points in this, Mr. Islam. The first point, of course, is that as far as Muslims themselves are concerned, there is a need now for some kind of political unity. Often, you know, Allama Shibli Nomani, who you might have heard of, he was the founder of the Nadwa, which is a very important Sunni.
I'm from Azamgarh. I'm a
descendant
of that family. Descendant of that family.
So well, here's something an anecdote about your ancestor. Allama Shibli, who was a great scholar, a religious scholar, but also the founder of Nadwa, which he wanted as an institution to a center of religious education, but that engages with the modern exigencies that Muslim faces. In 1912, he wrote an article in a paper called a magazine called the Muslim Gazette, and he said the title of that was "Leaderon ka qusur hai ya leader banane walon ka?" Is it the fault of leaders or those who elect leaders? And in that he says that until the matter of representation in Muslim politics is not sorted out, Muslims will have no political leader. Remember, he's writing in 1912 at a time when there are very big names in Muslim politics in India, and he dismisses all of them. He says they are all religious leaders. What we need are political leaders. And he gives the example of Gokhale, who today is a very forgotten figure of Indian politics, but he was a great, great man and a reformer. And he says until the chair of political leadership, siyasi qayadat ki kursi, is not filled by someone who is skilled in essentially in the politics and the tools of today, the community will suffer from disunity, because each group, each subgroup will want to control their own little community. They will be divided into sects. And this is not just the BJP, the Congress party did this, other parties have done this, where political representation has been done often either by religious clergy or also by certain forms of elite. So as you might know, in India, there is a huge amount of problems internally amongst Muslims because there's a caste system within Muslims also, right, where there are people who claim descent from ethnic groups that come from outside India, and people who are native to India. And you know, there is internal prejudice, and we have to acknowledge these. So the first thing is to peer within our own selves and you know, try and resolve our own shortcomings. And secondly, even though I would say, yes, Muslims are being sidelined, they're being excluded, they're being marginalized, they're being persecuted. Now, more importantly than ever, we must make common cause with other persecuted and marginalized communities. Because the only way to fight this battle is to actually, we need to speak out. Yeah. Exactly. And we need to speak out for other people, other groups who are persecuted for their belief, for their religion, for their gender identity. And until this happens, you know, people will consolidate on the basis of religion or ethnic supremacy, and everyone else will be scattered and fractured. So these are the two things I think that are very important.
What you're saying, Ali, that India needs to celebrate the richness of the religious diversity. We need to build the bridges rather than wall, right? And India should be placed for caring, sharing, and compassion rather than blaming and shaming. Correct?
I completely agree with you. And you know, the fact is that this has been, this is not something, I mean, this is not a future dream, our past, even though, again, like nationalist countries all over the world, I gave the example of Turkey, other countries, nationalist governments try and rewrite history. But the fact is that India has always been, if you look at the poetry of Maulana Rumi, for instance, even if you look at some of the hadiths, some of them are from the Prophet's time, India has always been seen as a land of learning, of wisdom. India has always, you know, Rumi talks about the wisdom, the spiritual wisdom in the Masnavi of India, and the fact that this is a fountain of knowledge. So this is not something new. I think all of these differences, or as you said earlier when we were talking about mosques, the fact is that the most vibrant civilizations are born out of confluence. Right. And as soon as you start to build borders, as soon as you stop people from interacting with each other, getting to know each other, as soon as you get into the debate of who's authentically local and who's authentically not, you see the end of the greatest empires began like that. The Roman Empire and onwards all the way until recently.
Very well said.
Today, India is the product of the confluence of a number of civilizations. And this is what makes it great. And if we stop and try and find some kind of authenticity, and this just doesn't only apply to Hindus, also to Muslims. Everyone in the 21st century is now concerned with authenticity. But the fact is that authenticity is an illusion. It is a quintessentially modern problem to be concerned with authenticity. It is a problem of the nation state. So
very well said, Ali. We are running out of time.
Sure.
But we will continue this conversation some other times. But you're very optimistic, which is wonderful. You look at the brighter horizon when you're indoor storm, and the Hindus and Muslims, they both drink the water from the same river. They cherish their children's future. They intermarry themselves among themselves, except the fact that things are not going very well these days. They need to find a common ground and seek a common place so we can work, so they can all work together. And your ideas and thoughts are very important as we move forward with India and what the current situation we have. We should not be divisive, but we should be inclusive. We should bring the people together. And that's what India has always been that. And thank you very much for your time. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas. And thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all you're doing to make a profound difference. This is Frank Islam. Thank you. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.